So let me open with this. I want you to imagine one of those amazing nature documentary shows, and what we're looking at is a little creature wandering around at night, and it's totally quiet. There's no other animals around, and it's got a little blindfold on. Okay. And it's walking around, and who knows what it's looking for? We don't know. Maybe it doesn't know even what it's looking for, but it's sensing something. It's like sniffing here and putting its whiskers out here and there. And it's kind of just wandering around. Now, let's just visualize this creature wandering around in this place. Maybe it's a forest or a jungle. And I'm going to call this creature the strange, lonely wanderer. Now, for me, this strange, lonely wanderer is like a really good image of what I would call the lower self. And this situation is a great way, I think, of depicting what the lower self situation is in relation to its higher self. So this creature doesn't know it has a higher self, is disconnected, is blindfolded, is trying to connect with itself. Now try and think, what kind of life is that? This little strange, lonely wanderer walking around this wilderness, unaware that it has a connection to something bigger, trying to connect or find something. We don't know what it is. Maybe it doesn't know what it is. What kind of life is that? And I would say it's a life of struggle. Hello and welcome. I'm Anton Jarrett, and you're listening to the very first episode of the Higher Self Dialogues. So let's start there with struggle. I know it's not like the most seemingly perhaps natural starting point for a podcast about the higher self. You know, you might ask, shouldn't you be talking about love and light and perfection and beauty and all of those wonderful things? Isn't connecting with the higher self meant to be all about that? Well, yeah, that's a part of it. But yeah, there's one thing missing from that, and that is it's hard. Connecting with the higher self is a struggle. Why does it have to be a struggle? Does it really have to be a struggle, or is it just a struggle for some people? There's a lot of questions there. And I would say, okay, aren't you being a bit of a downer here, talking about the struggle and the difficulties? Well, this is where I disagree, and it's one of the motivations for actually starting the podcast with these discussions, because that's this area, talking about the struggle, the difficulties, the challenges, the shadow side of things, is what's really missing from the equation. Now, I'm not saying I'm only going to talk about that, by the way. There's a lot of discussion to be had about the light and the joy. But for most people engaging with a genuine, who are genuinely encountering the pathway of connection to the higher self, it's mainly, and there's really good reasons for this, it's mainly a journey of challenge and struggle. And so the best way to connect with the light side is to find a way to deal with the struggle in a way that is conducive to creating and tuning into the light. It's about bringing light to the struggle. And then it doesn't have to be so bad. It doesn't have to be a really painful, lonely struggle, which it can sometimes be, and that's certainly been my experience. Don't worry, it's not all dark. It's not all black and lonely and painful. But it can be that. And so it's about speaking honestly about that so that it can be dealt with in a realistic, holistic, genuine way in which nothing is missed out, so that health and growth and life is healthier and ultimately easier and more bearable. So that's a whole other discussion. Let's get back to that little creature in the jungle. I think I like the idea of it being in the jungle, but also a forest. I like the idea of a forest. In England, we're much more used to forests. Let's keep it to the forest. And life in that forest, especially at night when these creatures come out, it's a little bit, challenging. And this creature, the lower self, feeling totally unaware that it has a higher self, therefore being separated from itself, is experiencing and expressing the human condition, and especially the modern human condition. Because I think that this is where we're at collectively. We are a community of beings who feel separated from one another and feel separated from ourselves, from the core of our being. And I would go as far as to say that nearly, well, perhaps even every dynamic that we observe out there in the world, all the social stuff, the psychological stuff, the spiritual, the economic, anything connected with humans can be traced back to this root of the condition of being a separated lower self, wandering around blindfolded in the dark. And this image really spoke to me because there's so much to say about this, about the spiritual journey. And it can go in so many different directions. And so it was a real kind of, when I was thinking how to start this podcast, what should I start with? And this was the richest kind of seed that I came across. There's so much to say about it because there's so much to say about the human condition, right? And so much to say about the impact and the consequences of this separation, this deep separation that the lower self feels. But what we'll do to make this simple, we're just going to focus on one thread from this, and we'll pick up other threads in other episodes. And the thread I want to focus on is, does it have to be a struggle? This journey of the higher self, this connection between the higher and the lower, does that have to be a struggle? And that begs the question, well, is it a struggle in the first place? And I think most of us, no matter what your experience, you can kind of intuitively, if you're honest, you can think, yeah, it probably is, right? And for someone has experience of this journey, I would say yes, definitely is a struggle. Now, if someone has never connected to their higher self, has never even heard the term, or really even sensed the possibility of a deeper connection, then the idea of a struggle might not make sense, and the possibility that there is this struggle going on might not be recognized at all. But it might manifest in life in some way as maybe a general sense of malaise, as a sense of dissatisfaction that just doesn't go away, a sense of anxiety or confusion. It's existential stuff, that low level persistent ache that's always there in the background. Maybe that is how someone who's never encountered this idea experiences the separation and the struggle of that separation. If we look out into our societies and cultures, our civilization, I mean, we rarely see that this idea of the higher self is reflected or expressed or talked about. This idea of higher consciousness, the ground of being, is not in public discourse. It's in private discourse. It's in this very niche area of life called spirituality. The absence of discourse from public life is telling, because it tells me that the sense of disconnection is not conscious in public life. Still there, the separation is there, it's having its effect. But it's not just that we're disconnected, and so disconnected that, it's not in the public consciousness. It's just that we're so far removed that we don't even realize what we're missing, or that there is this gap. So we feel the effects of it, and the struggle to connect then is so deep, so all-pervading, that many people haven't even reached the point, and society as a whole hasn't reached the point, where this struggle can even be named. Now, for those who do try, those who make even the smallest effort to turn inward, to reconnect, to look, to search, the difficulty becomes very obvious very quickly. The resistance, the distractions, the internal chaos, the weight of past conditioning that you have to try and deal with, the effort that you need to make kind of progress sometimes reveals how deep that struggle is. And not always immediately, but inevitably. Somewhere down the line, your experience tells you, yeah, this is a struggle, this is hard. So the question, does it have to be a struggle? I'd say yeah, it does. But it's not that straightforward. And questions of spirituality are never that straightforward, because in reality, it's also a case of yes and no. Let me delve into that a bit, because this is quite interesting. If we look at our collective story, so our history, Homo sapiens, our evolution, the spiritual traditions that have emerged over millennia, the challenges that we face, well, it becomes clear, I think, that for us now, in this world, in this time, each of us listening to this podcast, the path is a difficult one. But, and this is the point, that doesn't mean that struggle for connection, struggle to overcome this separation, doesn't mean that it's a universal rule. Doesn't mean that it's a cosmic necessity. In the great order of things, in the vastness of possibility across the universe of all being in infinite life, all the different forms it can take, the path of becoming doesn't have to be painful. Pain and suffering and great struggle isn't written into the code of evolution. So what's going on? Well, it just so happens, think about this, where is Earth in relation to anything? I mean, we're in kind of a backwater here, a tiny little dot floating around a star that's in an outer wing of a huge galaxy that's not even the biggest galaxy in the universe, so we kind of imagine that we're in a kind of backwater. And how I like to think of it is that, Earth, we are in a place, a zone, a frequency, a karmic terrain, if you like, where development is tough. We are growing up in a tough neighborhood. And here, the odds are stacked. The challenges, there's lots of challenges. Here, the path is narrow. Now, it doesn't mean that that's a universal condition. In other places of the universe, it's going to be more fortunate, maybe more harmonious. Life unfolds more gently. Evolution flows with grace. The movement from animal to higher animal, from physical to spiritual being, is maybe smoother. Maybe at the center of the galaxy, we can imagine worlds where everything is much more harmonious and everyone is kind of following the same path. There's a sort of attractive gravity, magnetism, where beings of like mind all kind of walk together, and it's pretty smooth sailing. Not here. There might still be resistance, but it's lighter, it's easier to navigate. Here, in our little corner of the universe, spiritual growth just has to happen through impact, through hard blows. It's the, what do they call it? The school of hard knocks. That's Earth. Doesn't have to be this way, but it is this way. And why is that? Well, the way I look at it, and certainly I think you find this kind of, explained and presented in many different ways, in many different spiritual teachings, it's to do with attraction, karma, energetic return. This idea that energy, that the energy you send out is the energy that comes back to you. So our experience is conditioned by what we send out. And if the place is like a kind of, dodgy neighborhood where it's kind of hard to grow up, then that's the frequency that we align with. And that's the kind of place that we help create through our frequency that other people can be attracted to. So this is the karmic environment that we've entered individually and collectively that we are a part of. So we're in the right neighborhood. It's not that we've been like, we've just popped up and we're not meant to be here. We're meant to be here, okay? This is where we have to do our work. And I think that realization took me a long time to kind of get to grips with that, to kind of let that settle. Take a moment to let that settle. Have a think about that. Yeah, what comes up for you? Okay, so right, we've grown up in this neighborhood. We've been attracted to this sphere of influence where there's a lot of opposition. You meet a lot of people who are not like-minded. There's a lot of conflict. Why? Now you might be thinking, why am I here? Why have I been born here? What have I done to deserve to be born here? And this is one of the great kind of delusions about energetic return, karma, is that we think it's a punishment, but it's not. It's about attraction and alignment. So being born in this challenging space is not about punishment. It's about aligning with the energies that are actually in you, that you haven't seen, perhaps, that you've not acknowledged, that you've pushed out of your consciousness, that are in your subconsciousness. And so being here is where you need to be to work with those patterns. They have drawn you here. And it's only through interacting with them that there's a chance to overcome them. And it's that is the work of evolution. They talk about how you don't meet anyone in life who isn't a mirror of yourself in some way, that life mirrors what's within. And so what we meet in the world in one way or another is a reflection of what is in us. And so it's kind of paradoxical to the lower self, who is there wandering around blindfolded, struggling, that inside that struggle, there's a beauty. And the beauty and the paradox is that, this struggle, this particular struggle, it's the only thing in the universe that will actually give you the chance to grow and connect with your higher self. So it's paradoxical because you think, surely the universe would have created a situation where the best thing that allows you to connect with your higher self is harmony, peace, and love. Well, yeah, that is the case if within you there's only harmony, peace, and love. But you've got to remember the animal has just come through involution and has a lot of animal tendencies that are still shaping it. Namely, the wish to kill, the wish to completely destroy other animals in order to eat and survive. There's a whole backstory to our existence in the involution phase of the cycle. And all of that stuff is in our subconsciousness and it plays out. And so for us who've been attracted to a place of great conflict, we obviously all had a lot of conflict in our past that now we need to resolve and work with to harmonize our being, our outer conscious life with whatever is going on inside. And the only way we can get to know what's going on inside is if it comes out, if it gets expressed in some way. And the only way for that to happen is to come up against some friction where that stuff is triggered. So if we're in a place where, it's all beautiful and light, but inside we've got all these tendencies of fear and anxiety. If there's nothing to fear, then we would never express this fear. We'd never work on it. It would just remain hidden. And it would be the very thing that keeps us from connecting with our higher self. But it'll just constantly remain unconscious. So we need the tension to help us see what within us needs to change. Whoa, well. Now, there's actually quite a lot to all of that. I mean, that was quite a lot, I think, to get a head around. There's much more to it, so I will unpack some of this stuff in a more expansive way, in different ways, through this podcast. Not this particular episode, but in other ones, because the whole dynamics of this, they happen to be, in detail, quite complex, I would say. But simply, you can kind of simplify it to the following. Life is structured in such a way, the kind of dynamics and shape of involution and evolution are so ordered that we are so structured that in order to evolve and connect with our higher self, we have to learn what is within us, and therefore we have to meet with the consequences of our own manifestation. There's no opportunity to skip lessons, to miss stuff out. And if we could, well, we wouldn't connect with our higher self. We wouldn't be able to, because the very conditions of that connection are that everything is resolved. Well, at least to some extent. So while it doesn't have to be a struggle in some ultimate abstract sense, for us here and now it is, and it has to be. Only until, however, we start recognizing the messages, the language. One of my favorite spiritual writers, Martinez, calls this the speech of life. You have to kind of learn to understand the speech of life, what life is telling you, about what's inside you. And you can only get that through experience, through interaction with other people in this or that circumstance. Because if it was left up to you, well, you'd make it all comfortable. You wouldn't seek out experiences of pain and suffering. You just wouldn't go and do that. One, because you're scarred from millions of years of being an animal where you're running away from threats to life. So we've internalized that. But two, we know what joy is and beauty, and we have a natural tendency to go towards that. So we wouldn't seek out discomfort and challenge the lower self. That little animal wouldn't go and do that. So life has to do it for us. And it will keep doing it until we start to learn what life is telling us, what life is showing us, until we start reading what's in the mirror and responding to it with sincerity. And that is when the struggle starts to lessen, when it starts to shift and change. Everything starts to move in a different direction. And that's when that neighborhood where we're growing up, that bad neighborhood where everything's, a mess, it begins to change. Suddenly, the houses are getting painted, the windows are getting repaired, people are putting flowers outside their door, resources begin to circulate, spiritual energy is attracted, and the landscape starts to look different. The streets are cleaned, resources begin to flow, life in a new sense starts to grow, and it becomes the teacher that we all know it is. Deep down, we know that life is a teacher, that this life is a school. Then it actually becomes so on a daily basis. And this is the slow movement back to connection when this shift happens. Connection to ourselves, to each other, to the ground of being. It starts to happen when the idea that it's a struggle becomes okay. Yeah, it's a school. I have to learn. It's going to be tough sometimes. In that shift and in the process of becoming kind of comfortable with struggle, something opens. And we begin to connect bit by bit, not with just the idea of the higher self, but the living reality of it with our own higher self, with the ground of our being. We're not just talking about the ground of being and higher consciousness. We're talking now about our own ground of being, our own higher consciousness. And this is where the real experience of separation that's haunted us, that's caused so much pain, begins to transform into a fuel for transformation. And then we're no longer those poor little blindfolded creatures walking around in the forest, kind of lost, but we're growing beings. We're planting roots, sending out shoots, reaching toward the light and finding our way. Without that connection, it's a kind of lonely life. I'm not talking about loneliness in the purely social sense. I'm not talking about how it's about not having people around or being isolated in a crowd or, feeling like you're surrounded by people, even close people, but you still feel alone. It's deeper than that. Those things are connected and are reflections, I think, of the state of separation that, the lower self experiences. But it's a deeper existential loneliness that comes from being separated from the truth and being of who we are. It's like an existential ache from being cut off from the source, from the divine, from the absolute, whatever name you give it. This is the separation that practically all spiritual paths are speaking of. And while it is it's ultimately an illusion. It feels very real from where we are, and it's very painful. But it's only a relative reality. But again, the kind of paradox is that you only kind of know truly that it's a relative reality when that living connection is made to the higher self, because it's the higher self that reveals that it's a relative reality, because then you go beyond all theory and speculation about it. It's not just an idea in a book. Then when you experience the connection to your higher self, then the illusion of separation reveals itself, that it's, because you have something to contrast it to. It's the experience of unity reveals the existence of separation. Until then, it's just a theory, right? But it's the experience that confirms all the knowledge and book learning that you might have done in this life, in previous lives. And plenty more to say about all of that in time. And the strange, lonely wanderer, that little creature walking around blindfolded in the forest, when it connects with its higher self, that blindfold comes off, and it's like, here's where I am. I see. I was going over there, and I thought I was going over there, but actually I was going there. It all kind of makes sense now. Right. What am I doing here? Let me have a look. And the sense of struggle becomes clear, what you've been doing, and then how to navigate this forest, how to start the next journey of deepening that connection with the higher self is a whole new chapter. And struggle takes on a different meaning, and so on and so on. It's an eternal journey. So it's in one way, the learning, the struggle is kind of not never done, but it just takes continually new forms. But life from that point onwards, when you kind of, evolve out of the physical life entirely, then you can say that's when the struggle is over, because then there really is nothing that is there to work with, because everything that you've been struggling with is conscious. And so it's all served its purpose. You don't need resistance anymore. Gosh, the journey then is another story entirely. We can talk about that in future episodes, but that's all for now. Thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to me, Anton Jarrett. This has been the very first episode of the High Self Dialogues.